The following presentation is an AI-free production, 100% researched, written, and edited by actual human beings. All mistakes are purely human error, guaranteed.
Hello, dig for bones.
Hello, and welcome to the Least Haunted Podcast, a place for science, skepticism, humor, and anthropology meet to discuss all things spooky, haunting, supernatural, and sometimes just the plain ridiculous. I'm your host, Cody Franks, and your regular, almost always co-host, Garth Von Anen, is thoroughly engrossed in his new hobby, raising jackalopes. So instead, today we are joined by a very special guest. You may know her from well over a decade's worth of YouTube movie and TV reviews, as well as very well-researched and hilariously presented history video essays, or you might even be one of her minions already. It is my great pleasure to welcome Diamanda Hagan to the show.
Hello. Welcome. Lovely to be here. Thank you so much.
Thanks for coming on. It was one of those, I think Blue Sky made the connection.
Yes, it was Creature, who's an absolutely wonderful person who caught your Blue Sky message and suggested me as a guest.
And what we're going to be talking about today is something that might not. Okay, so people who listen to the show are going to probably say, "Well, how is this in any way supernatural, paranormal, haunting, and spooky?" And I'm going to say, like, spooky and haunting in a very human sense, and also this is more, when I say this is supernatural in the way that that nature in all of its superness is terrifyingly destructive, and that is that we're going to be talking about the failed Arctic expedition of Sir John Franklin. Well, one of his failed expeditions, I should say.
Yeah, he didn't have a great record.
No. So I read a book called Searching for Franklin by Ken McCougan. He's a Canadian historian and has written like 15 different books on polar exploration. And when I got the book, I was expecting it to be mostly about the 1845 Northwest Passage expedition. And instead, it was mostly about the failed Coppermine River expedition.
Is that the one where he ate his boots, or is that the other one?
It's where he ate his boots.
Yeah.
But the book chose to go that route because it bookends it with the failed Northwest Passage expedition. But McCougan's perspective is that if you want to know more about Franklin as a leader and a man, you have to know about this earlier expedition. And it kind of makes the later one make more sense in context, I guess. So, What are we even talking about? For people who do not know, because I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people do not know about Sir John Franklin. Who was this guy?
Well, if they want to know who he is, they could go off and watch The Terror on AMC, you know. But if you don't want to do that, it is about 10 hours long. So, Sir John Franklin was one of the... he was a British naval officer. He was the lieutenant governor of what is now Tasmania for a while. He was, very interestingly, he was kind of a pacifist for a Victorian British military officer. But he also did a bunch of polar exploration, and his capstone to his career was supposed to be the Franklin expedition, which was the most expensive, I believe it was the most expensive. It was definitely one of the most advanced exploration attempts in the early Victorian era, where they tried to find the Northwest Passage, and like so many other people who have tried that, they had a bad time.
Yeah, having a bad time is to kind of put it very mildly. He's a naval officer, and he was at the Battle of Trafalgar, and I think that's kind of what turned him off of violence.
Yeah.
And then he like sailed around with his uncle for a while. What was his uncle's name? It was Flinder, I think. And they ended up getting shipwrecked on the Great Barrier Reef when he's about like 15 or 16. And in that instance, his uncle and a few guys make a raft and like, okay, we're going to try to sail back to Australia and get help. You all just wait here on this coral reef. And they left. And I think it was like 7 weeks that he was on this coral reef. And then they did get rescued, obviously, because we know that he went on to do other things. But I think that was like his first taste of also like desperately trying to survive in not necessarily ideal conditions.
Inclement.
Yes. Although in this case it's tropical, which is different than his other.
See, if you took all the places where he had a bad time and you put and averaged them out, he would have been great.
Well, he also had a bad time in Tasmania as well. But not for the same reasons. That was just more of like personal, like he just was miserable.
Plus there was some other stuff going on there too, including with his adopted Aboriginal daughter who he abandoned, and so yeah, I don't think it's possible to. He's definitely in the upper half of British Victorian sort of notable figures when it comes to decency, but it is not a great curve with Victorians. If you're a famous Victorian, you're almost always going to be a bastard. So he's like better than most, still not great.
He was also at the Battle of New Orleans in the War of 1812, but it was after the end of the war.
But they didn't know that.
No, they didn't. There was no way to get speedy messages across. After the end of the Napoleonic Wars, England had a surplus of Navy men that they had to figure out what to do with, because they had I think 145,000 men in their Navy. And they said, really, we can only afford 45,000. So we have to like let a lot of these guys go. And until we figure out what to do with most of them, we'll put them on half pay. And then the solution was, well, we're just going to like start throwing ships at the Arctic.
Yeah.
It seemed, or throwing men at the Arctic.
You see, killbots have a preset kill limit. Knowing their weakness, I sent wave after wave of my own men at them until they reached their limit and shut down.
On this show, we've talked about something like this before during the earlier age of exploration, which was that, like, for example, Spain, after they had reconquered the Iberian Peninsula, for the most part, they're like, what do we do with all these, like, hopped up religious fanatic soldiers that we've built? And they're like, let's just throw them all into, South America. And that seems to be what these imperial powers do. Is like, we have too many men, let's just throw them at some crazy task to keep them occupied.
Yeah, it's the I suppose with the British, it was also the between the Napoleonic Wars and then the Crimean War, they didn't do as much warring as usual. So like otherwise, I don't want to use the term Pax Britannica, but that's probably like the era that we're thinking of there. Like the world, at least for the Brits, was kind of peaceful. I suppose sending them into the Arctic was, and in exploration duty generally, was a bit better than sending them into South America. Better for there's a lot more things that will kill them, and there's a lot less people that they can kill. Plus, because of the sheer amount of difficulties, the colonialists in the Arctic tended to be a lot less destructive because they physically couldn't be, because they were too busy dying. So,
and also like there's not much for them to destroy anyway. It isn't gonna melt when the summer thaw comes around. Sometimes, so
it's like another case of it's not great, but it could have been worse.
Yeah. So.
I wonder what the American version of this is, because like America, I suppose it hasn't really had an extended period of peace after Great Wars where they have to, America keeps having more wars.
It's after the Civil War when we just started throwing Union troops at the Native Americans and
Oh,
trying to
okay. Yeah,
win the
that's
West.
terrible. Oh no.
It's usually send your excess soldiers to go subjugate some other people and conquer is usually what happens.
Oh dear.
Although it seems like in England's case, it was we need to fill in the last blank spot on our map and claim this. Because the dream of a Northwest Passage had been around since pretty much shortly after the discovery of the New World.
Oh yeah.
There was this idea of like, well, yeah, we can go down around the bottom of South America, which is cold and very stormy and dangerous. But we also can go maybe above North America where it's going to be cold and stormy and probably dangerous. But, it's worth a shot to find out. They also had this idea that there was an open polar sea.
Hmm.
The idea was that, like, yeah, there's like a layer of ice, but once you get past that, there's just open water because somehow, I guess the idea was that like the ocean currents would make the water warmer at the North Pole.
It's
I
if I
don't know.
remember, if I touched on this in my videos about the Jeanette expedition, which was the USA's Franklin expedition. A lot less big scale, but and some people actually survived. But essentially, the theory was that because they knew about magnetism and stuff like that, that there was going to be a really big magnetic thing at the North Pole, which obviously there is because it's the North Pole, but they thought there was going to be like a big mountain made of like, of iron. And
Ah,
it would somehow make the water around it unfrozen. You can there is a couple of maps. This German dude drew up maps of what he thought the polar sea looked like. You can see the mountain of iron and the ocean around it. So that's the science they were working from. Not great science, but there was some degree of science.
yeah. And I think I remember also reading that they had this idea that ocean water couldn't freeze unless it was close to the coast. They're like, oh, if it's close to the coast, it's almost like how an ice crystal needs some kind of what do they call it? What's the word for it? Is it occlusions or it's like if you freeze water, if you do it in the right way, it won't actually freeze until you impact it, and then it causes the rapid crystallization. So the idea was that like the ocean water can get really cold, but it's not going to freeze unless it's close to land because then it's bumping up against land, and that causes the freezing process. But if this open polar sea at the top, there's no land to cause the ice to form. That was another idea they had. Again, bad science. Um,
Yeah, it at the very least incomplete science, hideously
yeah.
incomplete.
And the other idea is that like it would be a shortcut to Asia. Um, but yeah, I don't know if there's no point where it really seems worth it in my mind. Where like it doesn't seem uh I guess knowing what we know now, it doesn't seem like it would be a very viable option because even when they're going to explore it, they're planning like, oh yeah, we're going to be like gone for maybe 3 years. It's like that doesn't seem any faster than doing it the other way, is it? Like
Yeah,
for that same time, you could like sail to the west coast of the United States. Well, actually, not at this point, but like later times, it's like by the 18. Oh, I guess the transcontinental railroad was like the 1860s. Never mind. It's like it seems like in 3 years you could take everything to one side of the continent and then like pack it across to the other side and then get on a boat and sail the rest of the way.
I get the feeling that by the time they worked out that there wasn't an open waterway there, and that the open polar sea is a bit of a dumb idea. I got the feeling that they felt too committed and they wanted just the glory of finding it. It was there was a
Yeah.
machismo thing.
Yeah. In 1819 is his first exploration, his first polar exploration mission that he is given. He is tasked with sailing to the Hudson Bay, which is already established by this time. The Hudson Bay Company and the Northwest Company are two rival fur trading companies that are active in what is today like Nunavut and like Western Canada and the Great Lakes region. And he's supposed to sail to the Hudson Bay and then working with these two different fur companies who are both quite literally at war with each other at this point. They are like actively raiding each other's outposts, killing each other, like open hostilities, but they both agree to like not harm his expedition and to help it in any way they can. And he's supposed to sail there, meet up with some of these guys, hire local guides, and then hike over 1,000 miles uh, northwest to the Coppermine River, and then sail this river to where it meets with the Arctic Sea, and then start walking along the coast east until he finds a way back to Hudson Bay. That is the mission. They give him 1 month to prepare. And yeah, it doesn't go well, as you would imagine. It is like a nightmare. Reading the book where this is all outlined, it was reminded me very much of when I read Che Guevara's Bolivia Diaries, which is his diary of the failed Bolivia revolution in which he was ultimately executed. And the two have these parallels where, like, at every step of the journey, there is not just bad luck, but extreme incompetence and misjudgment of their own abilities and misreading of the situation. So he hires some local, they call them voyagers. They're usually, they're like French or Métis, which would be half European, half indigenous fur trappers to like take him the way. And then at some point, like they just decide that they're going to have to just hunt along the way to support themselves, because all the supply depots that were supposed to be stocked before them, which are these trading outposts, didn't have the supplies. The supplies hadn't arrived, or the ones that had arrived were all rotten and no good. They're eating a lot of moldy pemmican. And
Holy crap. So, sorry, moldy pemmican? How do you, yeah, it's really hard to fuck up pemmican that badly.
yeah. Oh, that's the other thing. It's funny is that they would send back and say what they needed. And somehow these supplies would arrive ahead of them, meaning that the resupply people are more efficient than them themselves. I don't know if they're going a different route or what, because they seem to be, up to a certain point, they are following an established trail. And it still takes them 2 years to get beyond the point where they leave the last, like, established outpost. That's how bad they are at this.
No, the idea of the being quite terrible at it, and I'm being unable, taking so long to like to outdo the norm, the previous ones. It kind of reminds me of the Belgica expedition and how they were the first people to winter in Antarctica, but yet they didn't manage to get as far south as Captain James Cook 150 years earlier.
And where they were going was, again, somewhere that someone had already been from the west. So there had already been an exploration of like north coast of Alaska all the way down to the mouth of the Coppermine River, which you're just trying to get to. So someone had already been there before him. They just hadn't gone this route. At one point, they start making deals with the local indigenous group, the Dene, and offering them a bunch of rewards of like, yeah, we can't pay you now, but like after we establish this trade route, ships are going to come and they're going to give you what you guys want. He even writes them some like promissory notes or IOUs that they can supposedly take to these Hudson Bay Company trading posts and get reimbursed. And they're so slow in going about it that the Danae have time to go and try to make good on these notes and return to him, catch up to him and say, hey, they didn't pay us. You're full of shit. And then once they get to a certain point, they build a little wooden stockade and a camp, and this entourage of Danae camp with them. This is women, children, men, because at this point they're invested, and they also know that Franklin intends to deal with Inuit who are further north, who have a hostile relationship with the Danae. And so the Danae are like, well, if we can like use this guy as an intermediary, we can actually establish good relations with them going forward. So they're trying to like use him in that way. But then when they find out what his plan is, ultimately, they're like, yeah, dude, don't do that. Like, you will die. And he is told repeatedly by the indigenous people over and over again, you are going to die. This is a terrible idea. You don't know what you're doing. You have no supplies. The idea that you are going to hunt for food along the way is laughable. And we're just going to like pack up and leave. Um, the chief, his name was Aikacho. He tells them like, look, I'm leaving, but any of my men who want to commit suicide are welcome to stay and help you out if they want. And I think he gets a couple of hunters who are like invested and like, yeah, we'll go with you up to a certain point. And even they like bail because he decides that he is going to leave and sail downriver on the Coppermine River like already late in the season. And they're like, dude, by the time you get up there, it's already going to be September and you will be screwed. Again, he does not listen. He writes in his journal that like basically these savages lack British grit and they don't know what they're talking about. So sure, yeah, discount the people who only live there and have been there forever. Um,
Yep.
and that kind of is like a theme with him of
Oh, and beyond him as well.
yeah,
Of almost of most people involved in this kind of stuff at the time.
yeah. He also was adversarial with the French speaking voyagers that he had hired. He also was very jealous of one of his underlings, this guy named Back. Back spoke French because he had been taken captive by the French as a kid, when he was like 13 during the Napoleonic Wars. And I guess as a prisoner, they just told him, like, yeah, we're just going to put you in this village and you're free to roam around the village. You can go 6 miles radius, but you just have to be back for like roll call twice a day. So he ended up living with a French family, learns fluent French. When he gets to Canada, he's having like the time of his life on this trip up to a certain point. Like they're having two very different experiences where Back is having a great time joking around with the Voyagers and Franklin is just like hating on him to the point where he sends him away on like a wild goose chase at one point just to get him away. He's like, I'm just sick of this guy. Get out of here. Long story short, exactly what the Danae told them was going to happen happens. They get to a point where they reach the Arctic coast. They start walking east. Everybody in the team starts to mutiny because there's only 4 actual British Navy men in the group. There's 20 in total. The rest of them are all either hired indigenous guides, French speaking voyagers or Matisse, and also one Italian guy is there. And at a certain point, order kind of breaks down where like the guys who are hunting, he only has, I think 3 of them who are actually skilled hunters and they're not finding any game because it's too late in the season. All the animals have already migrated away. And at one point they just go on strike. They're like, look, we're not going to go hunting until you turn around because you're going to kill us all. And he finally is like, okay, like give me 4 more days and then we'll turn around. And they give him 4 days and he makes good on it and they turn around. But by this point, it's too late. They don't even make it to the Coppermine River. They find a little like tributary that might meet up with it. And they're like, okay, we're just going to like follow this and hope that it hits the Coppermine River. And they go across this area that's called the Barren Lands. And they start losing men like one by one. For various reasons. Like one gets swept away by the river, one just disappears in the night, and they think that he just decided that he had a better chance of going on his own. And then eventually they make it to the Coppermine River. It's more hardships, and they've hit a certain point now where they have to split up because some of them are so malnourished that they can't carry on. And so they leave like 4 guys behind and the rest of them they estimate they're about 40 miles now from their base camp that they had made the previous year. And they also are operating under the assumption that this base camp had been stocked uh, by the Danae. They made a deal with them. They said, hey, if we don't intend to come back this way, but if we do, could you stock that for us? And so we have food when we get back. And they're like, yeah, sure, no problem. Unbeknownst to them, the hunting for the Danae was also terrible that year. And so they didn't even have enough food for themselves. So they're heading to a place that is not stocked with food. They split the team up. They're eating nothing but lichen at this point, or they call it tripe de rioche or tripe of the rock, and which is making some of them violently ill because you can't eat all types of lichen. Some you can, some you can't. And this is when they end up eating their shoes. the four men he leaves behind, he leaves them behind. These are the officers. So now it's just him, and I think by this point there's only 11 of them left out of the original 20. Uh, they get halfway, and a few of those guys tap out. They're like, "Hey, we can't go any further. We're gonna head back to where the other guys are and wait for rescue." He sends them off. Those men never seen alive again. What basically happens is a Donner Party situation. Yes, he's the man who ate his own shoes, but they always leave out that the rest of his people committed cannibalism. Although a few of them claim that it was unknowing. They're like, we didn't know, because what happened was one of the hunters who they sent back, he shows up to them. He says, "Hey, these other guys, I lost them in a storm, can't find them, but I'm going to go hunting for you." And he brings back some meat and he tells them, "I found a dead wolf. Here, eat this." And they eat that. And like later they look back on it like, "Oh yeah, he probably fed us people." And then he murders one of them. And then the other two conspire to kill him before he kills them. So yeah, it goes bad, real bad.
And Sir John Franklin in this whole thing, he's basically Jeffrey Jones's character in Ravenous.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Although he never he wasn't there when they ate people, so and there's no evidence that he ate anybody, because when he gets back to his base camp, I think they called it, was it Fort Resistance? I think is the name of it.
Sounds about right.
They end up having to like pull up the floorboards and burn them for heat. They cook and eat the skin blankets that they have. Two of those men die. What eventually happens is that he sends the guy that he had been trying to get rid of already. He sends him ahead, and he finds the Dene camp, tells them what's going on. They send some guys back, and they find Franklin, and they nurse him back to health. And by this point, the other survivors of that cannibalism camp make it there. And so they all get rescued. Yeah. So he gets back to England, and all anybody talks about is like, not that, almost, I think only six out of the original 20 survive. And everybody says, "Oh, he ate his own shoes. He's the man who ate his own shoes." So he did such a great job on that one. The next bet, let's do it again. And so they send him back to do another overland expedition.
With George back again.
Yeah, with George back again. And also, I think Richardson goes with him, which was his second in command, who later would lead one of the rescue missions to try and find him when the failed expedition later. So the second overland, actually, they accomplish all their goals. It actually works out. This one is a lot different. They were just sent to, I think, to retrace the steps to the mouth of the Mackenzie River, I think.
Yeah, it's the Mackenzie River expedition.
Yeah. And this one goes fine. And then it's after that point that he becomes the governor of Van Diemen's Land, or Tasmania. And then, yeah, everything's just pretty standard career until 1840s, when they're like, "Hey, we want you to go back to the Arctic in boats this time."
Until he commits the worst thing a historical figure can do and agree to be played by Kieran Hines in a TV show.
Hey, I liked Rome.
Oh, there's nothing wrong with them. His characters always die.
Oh, yeah. That's a good point. Yeah. Wow. I didn't think about that. Usually in awful ways. Okay. Yeah. So, So they're going to do this expedition with two ships, the Erebus and the Terror, which were retrofitted warships that had been tricked out for polar exploration. But this was not those two ships' first polar exploration. I found out they actually they'd gone to Antarctica with Ross, who is probably one of the most successful polar explorers at this time.
Oh yeah, James Clark Ross. He is the king of early Victorian polar exploration, and he looks pimp as all hell if you see a painting of him. The one with him with the fur on him, he's like, Jesus Christ, that guy could be on a catwalk.
Yeah, he's the one for whom the Ross ice sheet is named. He also did some exploration on the up in the in the Arctic, as well as the Antarctic. But yeah, he takes these two ships. They explore around Antarctica. It's why there's a Mount Erebus and a Mount Terror in Antarctica.
Oh, but you forgot to mention about why the Erebus and Terror have the names Erebus and Terror, because Terror is self-explanatory, but Erebus is the ancient Greek god of darkness, because they were originally the bomb vessels, but they took part in the shelling of Fort McHenry. They were.
Oh, that's right.
They were two of the ships that caused the Star Spangled Banner to be written.
That's right. Yeah.
Sorry, that's very important for the Franklin expedition.
Yes, because you're going to have a man who was at the Battle of New Orleans sailing on ships that were at the Battle of Fort McHenry. Wow, I didn't really make that connection. So yeah, they decide the ships did so well going to Antarctica, they're going to send him up to find the Northwest Passage. They put Franklin in charge, and then the second captain is Crozier.
Francis Moira Roderick Crozier.
Who is way more qualified than Franklin for the job.
Oh, very much so. And was, if you see the Terror, played by Jared Harris.
He'd done some successful polar explorations already. He spoke some Inuit.
He had a nickname among the Inuit, Agluka, which you'd think would assist in searching for them, because they can be all like, where's the white guy called Agluka? But unfortunately, the word Agluka was also used as a generic term for English explorers in a completely separate sort of thing. So they're like,
yeah.
There's a million Aglukas.
Yeah, that's I for 9 years worked in a butcher shop where most of my coworkers were Mexican, and for those 9 years when I was at work, I was known as güero, which actually means like blondie, which I do not have blonde hair, but it also is just a catch-all term for like white boy or whitey. So yeah, I was güero, and yeah, there's a million güeros. So yeah, Crozier, and then James Fitzjames, which I just love that. The name to me is like, I don't know if I could. It feels hard to take him seriously with a name like James Fitzjames.
Oh, the origin of the name?
No.
It's because he was a noble bastard. In the same sort of Game of Thrones time, the thing, it was traditional.
Oh, that's right, Fitz.
Yeah, son of James.
Right.
His father was James Gambier, who was a baron. But Fitzjames he was raised by another family as a mark of shame, and he knew who his dad was, but he deliberately did all he could to hide who his father was. And it was only, it was after The Terror, the novel, was written, but before The Terror, the TV show, was made, that they discovered who his father actually was. And that's why you have a reference to him being a noble bastard in The Terror, the TV show, that was brought in there from actual history.
Oh, okay. And he, I like that in your video, you represented him by Ace Rimmer.
What a guy.
Yeah, he's a man of adventure. He's ready to go. Because, yeah, I guess that makes sense that he's got a lot more to prove being a noble bastard.
Yeah. Yeah, he was trying... He was basically trying to make a name for himself independent of the father that would not recognize him. This is... And interestingly, among all of the relics found from the Franklin expedition, they found some cutlery with a cockatrice on it. And now all of the cutlery was monogrammed. We know who owned which. They all used different monograms. But the cockatrice is not among them. It is theorized. This might not be a theory anymore, but it might have been proven. But it's theorized when I saw a whole talk on this. That the cockatrice was Fitzjames's because he was making a joke because a cockatrice is meant to be born from a cockerel's egg. It is something unnatural. It should not exist. And so that him making a joke about his own origins.
Ah, I like that. Wasn't he the one that was given charge of like picking the crew for the most part, or just for the one ship? He
was given overall command control over picking the crew. Crozier, who should have been in charge of picking a lot of guys, was only allowed to choose one, his personal valet. And Fitzjames, unfortunately, he mostly chose officers that he had served with in various wars in Asia, most of the Boxer Rebellion and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. when if Crozier had been given the job, he'd probably have picked a bunch of people he'd served with in Antarctica. Because him and Ross spent 3 or 4 years in Antarctica and nearly dying a bunch of times, getting a new furthest south record, doing a lot of very, very impressive stuff. And in one bit, which is not in any, which is I think is only in one book referenced. They built a frost fair on the Antarctic ice sheet, and they flattened it out with theatrical supplies because they would bring theatrical supplies to entertain the men, and they built up this little scene, and they made an area part in the center to be flattened out to be a dance floor. Captain Ross went in drag, and Captain Crozier was in formal wear, and they had the first dance.
That is awesome. Wow. They're like, yeah, this is probably, you know what? It probably holds to this day, probably the record for the southernmost drag show.
I wouldn't be so sure about that, because the British tradition of keeping theatrical supplies on ships was actually went into the 20th century. I believe Shackleton had supplies and everything there too, so it wouldn't be so 100% sure, but maybe. I mean, Shackleton, his lost expedition, the Endurance, it didn't get anywhere near that south, but him and Scott may well have had theatrical supplies.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm making assumptions, I guess. But yeah, just they did. Hey, everybody, there was a drag show that happened in Antarctica in the what would that be, the 1830s?
That was late 1830s. Yeah. You get a lot of subtext if you read stuff about Crozier and Ross that they might have had a bit of the Frodo and Sam about them.
Mm-hmm.
And that might be part of it.
So for sending these guys up to find the Northwest Passage, these ships are decked out. They are pimp my ride. With hulls that are reinforced in some places to be 8 feet thick. They have coal-powered steam engines with retractable propellers to give them extra propulsion. There is built-in piped in-floor heating. There's a heating system that's piped through. They have a desalination system. They have enough food and supplies theoretically for 3 full years, over 1,000 books. There's musical instruments, the theatrical supplies, like you mentioned. What else we got on?
They get a player piano.
A player piano, you have the essentials. And all kinds of scientific equipment, because they are supposed to be, in addition to mapping this part of the map, filling out the part of the map that's blank, they are also going to be collecting magnetic readings and all kinds of weather readings, all kinds of stuff. It's the most well-funded and thought out exploration to this date. One source I was reading, a historian said, it'd be imagine if Apollo 11 went behind the dark side of the moon and then just never came back. That's what kind of happens here.
So people went a bit nuts about it for a wee while.
Yeah. So they sailed off, they got underway. All right. They made it to Greenland, where I think 5 men disembarked, and then they sailed off. And the last time they were seen was in Baffin Bay in 1845 by some whaling ships. And then, goodbye. They just, sailed off into the void. It swallowed them. The Langoliers got them, I guess.
Yeah.
And so 2 years go by, and Franklin's wife, Jane, goes to the Admiralty, and she's like, hey, it's been 2 years with no word. Maybe we should do something about that. Send someone to go find them. And they're like, oh, no, it's cool. They got supplies for 3 years. We don't need to worry yet. And that point was 1847, when she's like, hey, we should start thinking about going. And as we'll find out later, it was already too late by that point for some of them.
Yeah.
So as to what happened to the expedition, the timeline of events and what we have to go off of is based purely on secondhand accounts from that was largely ignored from Inuits afterhand, as well as they sent dozens of expeditions to try and find out what happened. At one point, there were like 10 different ships at one time that were moored at Beachy Island at the entrance to the Northwest Passage, which is where Franklin made his first winter camp. And we know that he made his first winter camp there because in 1850, 3 graves were found there, as well as the remains of a stone hut, what looks like was made into a smithy. So there was like, there might have been like an anvil there. They were doing metalworking and a few other little structures. And
If I remember, they also shot a polar bear, and they found a shot in its skin, old, which they theorized came from one of Franklin's men trying to kill it beforehand.
yeah, so there's evidence that they were there. The 3 men that they had their wooden headstones. It was John Torrington,
William Brain, and Thomas Hartnell,
yeah, and Hartnell.
who is a distant relative of William Hartnell, the first Doctor Who.
Oh, wow.
Not a direct one. I believe Hartnell is a descendant of his brother.
Yeah, so in 1850, when this is found, was it? It's not McClintock that found it, was it? Anyway, I guess that's not as important, but it's found, and they exhumed one of the graves. They did dig up Hartnell at that time, and because when they later exhumed these bodies in the 1980s, there was damage on the top of his coffin from picks that had dug into it, and also they recorded that they had dug him up, so we knew that they had, but there was physical evidence of it as well. And then from that's like the last physical evidence for a while as to what happened to them. And at that point, it's like, okay, so 3 guys have died. The question is, how did they die? They are very emaciated, all 3, but were exquisitely preserved to the point where when I was a child, the way I learned about the Franklin expedition is because like a lot of books and magazine articles really liked to jump scare you, where you would turn the page and here's these frozen faces staring back at you. So well preserved that you can still see the color of their eyes.
Yeah. Torrington in particular, they love Torrington, the picture of him.
Yeah. I watched so in preparation, I was like, okay, well, I know what the current story is and the stuff that we know now, but what was past thoughts? So I watched a PBS documentary from 1988 about the 1984 exhumation of the bodies and when they did autopsies and x-rayed them. And that's when they started coming out with the lead solder theory, was that these men had lead poisoning. Because they tested them and they had a significantly higher amount of lead than is acceptable to be in a person. I mean, ideally it should be like no lead, but they had a magnitude of like 10 times the amount of lead that you would find in like, say, a modern person.
Yeah.
And so quickly the finger is being pointed at the soldered cans, the canned food that was sent on the expedition. They had like 33,000 pounds of canned food for the trip. And it had been outsourced in true government fashion, to the lowest bidder.
Goldner.
Yeah. And yeah, some of these cans, the food was spoiled already. There was the chance that there could have been botulism in it, as well as the lead, of course.
Some are filled with rocks.
So they wouldn't even have they don't even have the food they think they have. And even if they did have it, it still would have been slowly poisoning them. However, although this theory held for a very long time, it was actually found that how these men actually died, it was either tuberculosis or It's basically that they had another illness. The lead didn't help. It already weakened their system. But it's either pneumonia or tuberculosis that actually killed the three of them. And that would explain that their emaciated state is towards the end stages of tuberculosis. You cannot eat. And when they did the autopsies, they also found that their stomach contents, there was nothing in their stomach or their bowels. So they hadn't eaten for several days. They also found with Hartnell that he had been autopsied at the time of his death. And that was a big surprise. When they went to examine him, they're like, oh, they took x-rays first. And they're like, this makes no sense. None of his organs are where they should be. They're all just jumbled up in there. And then they undressed him and found that he had already been cut into.
The autopsy, there's a very fascinating detail there because the Y incision is upside down.
Oh, yeah. Did they ever figure out why?
The last research I saw on it indicated that they still don't know why, because apparently with the history of autopsying in the early days of autopsying, they didn't record what way they do the Y. And this is before that. So it might have been, it's theorized it was Goodsir that did it, that he might not have known how to do it correctly, or that might have been the style at the time. We don't know.
Wow. Yeah, there's a lot about this that we will never know. Wow. I noticed that they did make a note of that. They were like, oh, that's weird. The Y is upside down. But then I didn't know if they'd ever actually come up with a reason. But the lead theory. So if these men were getting lead poisoned, it would explain some of the later evidence we have for why they made certain choices, because lead poisoning impairs your cognitive function. It also makes you irritable and a whole bunch of other problems. Your organs are all fucked. Based on human remains that were found later that we know are from the Franklin expedition, these other remains, which are from years later and had been eating the canned food longer, don't have the same elevated level of lead exposure consistently. Like there's some that just, it doesn't seem like if it caused the high lead spike in these, why aren't these guys have more lead? And it might be, we don't know, it just might have been the standard background lead level of somebody from England in that time, because there was more lead exposure in life in general.
I was just going to mention there's another possibility that the amount of lead in the individual sailors could be wildly different depending on where they're from in England and their socioeconomic class. I believe all three of the guys from Beachy were all, poor. So,
because that actually comes up when we know about like the discrepancy in deaths between the officers and the enlisted men coming up. There's also this idea that they were getting lead, but it might not have been coming from the cans. It might have been coming from the desalination system they had, with the lead soldered pipes being heated up repeatedly, and they're drinking this water. So, for example, in modern times, I can't believe that not many people know this, and I had to educate my brother-in-law, who I thought was smarter than me. You cannot drink the hot water out of your taps. Don't do that, people. The hot water, when you turn your faucet and it's coming out of the hot water heater, you can clean with it, do your dishes with it, but you should not be cooking with it or eating or consuming it, because most of those hot water pipes are lead soldered. I had to explain this to him. He lives in a house that was built in the 1930s, and he was trying to show me his life hack that you could get a jump start on cooking pasta if you start with hot water from the tap before putting it on the stove.
This is why I think the old... In the UK and Ireland, until very recently, houses all came with a standard 2 taps, hot and cold. And I still feel that's sort of superior, because it's a lot harder to mix them if you only have than if you have 1 tap.
Yeah, that actually does make more sense. I think about that myself, because I'm like, okay, so I do my dishes with my hot water. It's coming out of the same tap. And then I flush it out with some cold water for a bit, and then I'll get myself a glass of water and drink that. Is that really, am I just like deluding myself? And am I getting, anyway, all's to say, we don't know if the lead in the cans contributed as much as other factors, because there are other factors.
Many of them.
Yeah. Before we get into all that, though, I think this might be a good spot for us because we're going to start talking about finding some bones narratively in the story. So it might be a good time for us to take a moment and dig for some bones. And yeah, we're going to dig for some bones and then we'll be right back. We at the Least Haunted Podcast stand with those of the LGBTQIA plus community and especially want to voice our support for the trans community, masculine, feminine, non-binary, and every other of the beautiful assortment of people who are going through so much vitriol and hate in these difficult times.
We welcome you to join our friendly and supportive Discord, and if you want to help support the community or need help yourself, we fully endorse the Trans Lifeline at translifeline.org. We can get through this together.
You are all deserving of life and love. And remember,
The world's more beautiful with you in it.
And we're back. So those were some bones, weren't they? Yes, bones. And speaking of bones in the Arctic. So some of the next evidence that we get for what happened to the Franklin expedition come from explorers who were sent to try and rescue them. And they start finding artifacts, and they find bones along King William Island, which is pretty far south from, it's I think 400 miles south from Beechy Island. So we know that they made it that far. And I'm trying to remember the order of when they find things. When did they find the cairn with the message?
Oh, Point Victory. That was found, I believe, within like the first 5-10 years. So early for Franklin searchers in the grand scheme of things, but took a little while in, on micro level.
Yeah, they find so. As was the fashion at the time for polar exploration, if you would leave messages behind in stone cairns, these stacks of stones, so that other people could find it. Because think about it, there's like not a lot of waypoints in a bleak white landscape that you can find. There's no trees to build anything out of wood or leave signposts. So it's like almost like a breadcrumb trail of these stone piles that would have messages hidden inside of them. Oddly enough, that's actually something that was also used by the Inuit for navigation. They would make stone cairns themselves, and so it's kind of this parallel thinking. And I don't know if the European explorers learned that from the Inuit, because it doesn't seem like they bothered to learn much from them in general that they did in practice. Anyway.
Do not know.
So a place called Point Victory, right? They find a cairn and they open it up, and inside there is a copper tube or a metal tube with a standard like log sheet. It's like a boilerplate sheet that has like fill in the blanks, like Mad Libs, like enter the date, enter the coordinates, write some notes, and then below that is like pre-written in different languages. Like, if you find this, return it for a reward.
Yeah. But what's really weird is that Franklin, he only left like 2 of these. He's meant to put them down like wherever they go, yet they didn't do any in Beechy. And
yeah,
he seems to have been very cavalier about the leaving messages, which is very, very strange. Although theoretically he could have left other ones because the Inuit would sometimes open them up and to take the metal because it's precious in the Arctic. But the Inuit weren't at Beechy, and they weren't as far north in King William Island. So I doubt it.
Yeah, we don't know. There's a lot of things that just don't make sense, which again could be like, oh, were they getting slowly poisoned and making poor decisions? So it has 2 entries on it. The first one is from 1847, which basically just says like, all is well. We got stuck in the ice north of the island over winter, but everything's still cool. And then another entry it's been taken back out, and then written in the margins is another entry from, I want to say, is it 1840?
That one, there's a bit of a question over that one. I can't remember the exact details, but Fitzjames wrote that, the second message. but he also got the year wrong, and I can't remember the exact details. So he wrote down 1 year off from when it logically should be, based on all the evidence. But that's another level of, we don't know.
Yeah, exactly. But basically the message is to paraphrase, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit. Not all is not well.
Everyone's dead, Dave.
Are you trying to tell me everybody's dead?
Yes, everyone is dead, Dave. Everyone. Actually, not everyone. He says what? 4 officers have no 9 officers. Oh god, dude.
I guess 9 and 15.
How many was it?
I think this is just off the top of my head. I think it's 9 and 15.
Yeah. 9 officers are dead and 15 servicemen are dead. And did he say they were? Oh, and the ships have been abandoned. All is lost.
And that they are they're heading for Backfish River in the morrow, but they're not sure if this is meant to be a permanent migration down or if it's a expanded hunting party. There's a lot of information that they didn't put in.
Yeah. And so I mean it's like it can establish where they were at a time, maybe, if depending on the year, like a 1 year, plus or minus a year. And it gives us an idea of where some of them maybe were going. Yeah, it's not very helpful at all.
Oh, also, they mentioned that Lieutenant Gore was now being referred to as Commander Gore. So Gore, either that's another mistake or Gore got a field promotion.
Oh yeah, well also, we overlooked the most important detail. Franklin is dead.
Yes.
I'm sorry. I can't believe I buried the lead there. Franklin is dead. He died in June of 1847. Maybe. Depending on the year.
And we're not even sure who's in charge at this point because you've got Crozier is the obvious one who should be in charge, but there's
James is the one writing the letter.
Yeah, Crozier also wrote a little addendum, and Fitzjames he's upper class and he's English, and he worked directly with Franklin, while Crozier is Irish and he's sort of upper middle class, and so we know the crew's fractured at some point. We don't know who had come in. Like, I would assume Crozier should, but it's not always how things go when shit gets real.
Yeah, it could have been this could have been a situation where they split up, just like with Franklin's copper mine expedition. It's like, well, some of you wait here. The most able-bodied of us are going to make a go for it and try to get help.
That's my theory. I mean, obviously, theory is a bit strong. Hypothesis is that Fitzjames led the bulk of the men going south, and then Crozier stayed in charge of the men on the ship, because some men stayed on the ships. And because Crozier was an extremely able sailor, especially to do with ice, and he was in his early 50s. He does not have experience walking great distances. He would be a detriment on the march down. But Fitzjames had done a fuckload of walking in his day. And he was, so he would have been perfect to lead that expedition, especially if they've got the bulk of the men, because, he's handsome and ace-rimmerish, they'll follow him. So that all makes sense. And we do know that Fitzjames's body his bones have been identified, I believe, just on the mainland, south of King William Island, which makes sense, again, that he'd die in the first big wave, because he had a lot of war wounds which would open up because of scurvy, but obviously they wouldn't know that. You mentioned scurvy. Well, the looming specter of scurvy is here, everybody. We'll address it in a little bit. So I want to talk about one of the men who goes in search of Franklin is this guy John Ray. And poor John Ray, because he actually takes the time to speak to the Inuit. And it's like, well, maybe they know something. They might have seen something. And so let's ask them and talk to them. And so he starts collecting, he gets some items. He encounters some Inuit who actually have artifacts that are
unquestionably from the Franklin expedition. And he's like, well, where'd you get these? And they start telling him a series of stories about, well, in one story, there are ships stuck in the ice that they have been on. In another is that like, oh, well, we also found like a overturned boat in a tent, and inside were a bunch of dead white guys, and they'd been eating each other. Like they were all hacked to bits, and yeah, it was not good. But we took some of these metal objects because metal is very precious in the Arctic. And but they couldn't really give him a definite direction to where this was. It was very vague.
Yeah, because traditional Inuit, if I remember correctly, traditional Inuit sort of ways of telling where things were, they weren't in the same way that our one, where everything's absolute. You know, things are things. It's more of a case of you go to this place that we both know, then you go to then you go towards this other place that we both know, and then you go there. And if you don't have all the context, you're a bit screwed.
Also, it's been over 10 years since this happened to them, so it's also recollections. So there's other stories that are collected of a group encountered 30 men pulling a boat across the ice, and that they communicated with their leader who asked for food. They gave them some seal meat and stayed with them like overnight. But then the next day they got the hell out of there because they're like, we can't support 30 starving men on the ice, and we got to find food for ourselves and our families back home. And so they just couldn't, there's no way they could have saved these guys anyway. And so they got out of there. And they said when they left, one of the men was running after them yelling, and they just dog sledded off into the ice. So there's these different stories that are coming from the Inuit about encountering Franklin's men, finding evidence of Franklin's men. And John Ray goes back to England with his report and tells them like, they're gone and they seem to have eaten each other. And this was such an they wouldn't even entertain the idea that true civilized British men would resort to cannibalism. And so, he was like blacklisted and made the subject of a smear campaign by Lady Jane Franklin and her very powerful friend, Charles Dickens.
Yep. Dickens, who co-wrote a play parodying Ray, and it's called The Frozen Deep.
I remember when I was like, first read the passage of his actual words where he speaks so disparagingly of the Inuit and calling them savages and saying, no, they probably murdered Franklin's men. They probably killed them and ate them because, that's what their race is like. Basically, I'm paraphrasing. It was way more racist than that, but eloquent at the same time. And you're like, God, this guy's a fucking asshole.
Yeah. If you want to know more about John Ray, there's a great documentary film called Passage, which came out 2015, something like that.
Yeah, Passage is actually based on a book written by Ken McCougan, who wrote the book that I read on this. And he is a big champion of John Ray. He is in a disagreement with another polar historian where McCougan wants to give credit for actually finally discovering the Northwest Passage to John Ray while he was looking for Franklin, that he had actually completed the circuit. And the other historian disagrees and says, no, actually, it was someone else who was also looking for Franklin who did it. So they just have a disagreement about that. But yeah, John Ray, he was vilified for not just daring to suggest that the cannibalism had happened, but also that like he took the time to actually talk to the natives and in their language and was like friends with them, and had he was only so successful because he had adopted like their method of dress and learned how to build igloos and stuff like that. And so again, it's like, no, you've gone too native and you have, a soft heart, basically. They just wouldn't accept that they had eaten each other. Lady Jane Franklin really didn't want to accept the idea that her husband could have resorted to cannibalism. Never mind the fact that in his first failed expedition, men did resort to cannibalism. So we do know it happens, and especially with officers.
Yeah, the reticence of the British establishment to accept that cannibalism happened is insane. I mean, they were part of the British Navy, and cannibalism was nicknamed the custom of the sea.
Yeah.
It's,
Or also as poetically put by John Ray, the last resource.
yeah,
I thought it was resort, but no, last resource.
Even today, there are people who refuse to accept that it happened. Like the film Passage has interviews with this English military historian who refuses to accept, who still believes that the Inuit murdered the Franklin expedition. At least as far as I can tell, based on the documentary, that's what he thinks. And it's like, Jesus Christ.
One of Charles Dickens' descendants actually did issue a formal apology in like 2014. Like they traveled to, I can't say.
Jua Heaven?
Yeah. Jua. There we go. That's how you say it.
I think that's how. I think that I've never heard it spoken. But I think that's how you pronounce it. It's named after. It might be pronounced Ewa. It's named after Amundsen's ship that he did the Northwest Passage in.
Yeah, because spoiler, it's not until what year was that? Like 1900. Was it 10?
Something like that. Yeah, it was before he did this. It was before the South Pole.
Yeah, Roald Amundsen sailed through the Southwest Passage. It took him still like 2 years, and he did it in a small boat, which was something that had been suggested, and I learned this from your video. That guy, was his name King?
Dr. Richard King.
Yes, who had told the Admiralty when they first were planning this, he's like, it's going to fail. It's going to fail. You have to do it in a small boat, and you have to do it this way and take this path.
Small team of experts, tiny boat. It'll take years, but it's doable. I'm Richard King. I am very unknown for a guy who's apparently a fucking prophet. And not only that, but several years later, I'm going to send you letters telling you exactly where they've been frozen in, and I'm going to be freakishly accurate once again.
Yeah, and a wizard, this man. Ignored. But Roald Amundsen listened to him later, and hey, it worked. So they're looking for, meanwhile, they're looking for Franklin. They have not found the ships. They start finding skeletal remains. They find a wooden boat that has been converted into a sled, or a sledge, with 2 skeletons on board and an assortment of random items that don't seem to make a lot of sense for why you would be taking them with you, like a writing desk and a lot of silverware and cutlery.
The items that have been in the Franklin expedition, on their surface they don't make sense. I have seen arguments from historians defending the choice of each one. And for instance, writing desk, wood, you can burn it.
Exactly. Yep.
Cutlery and silverware, metal, barter.
Trade.
Even curtain rods, you can use that as a way to help prop up tents. So
yeah, it all made sense to me. If the idea was that they knew they were going to have to, if this is Fitzjames' rescue expedition, they're like, okay, we have to take the boat, because once we get to Back's Fish River, we need to use these boats to get up it. And that river, by the way, extremely wild and rapidous. And I don't know how these men had any hope. Once they got there, I don't think they really had a hope of getting up the river in their boat in the condition they were in anyway. But they're like, we're going to need this boat. Also, if there is any open water, because they are on King William Island and they know that they have to get to the mainland. Although if it hasn't been explored yet, how do they know they're on an island? I guess they're just hedging their bets.
It was called, I believe at the time it was known as King William Land.
Yeah.
But they also had with them was one inflatable boat, a very early one called a Halkett boat.
Okay, so yeah, just in case, hedge your bets. And then all the trade items. So you have if they encounter, because they also know that even if we don't encounter Inuit, once we get to the river and start heading inland, we're probably going to run into indigenous people who could help us. And if we can trade and barter and get food from them, all the better. So yeah, it all makes sense to me. It just didn't work, sadly.
Yeah.
Other stories that come from Inuit oral tradition, there is that, and this also supports the idea that somebody stayed with the boats or at least returned to the boats. There is the story of an Inuit who boarded a frozen ship and then they encountered men with black faces and hands who yelled at him and then weren't going to let him leave until they say a captain, but I don't know how he knew it was a captain, but someone else shows up and then like gets them to allows him to leave, but points to the mainland where there's a tent and explains whatever you do, don't go to that tent. There's dangerous people there.
Those two cases, I think they might be two separate events.
Separate?
I think so, but things can be confused with the Franklin expedition very easily.
Yeah, there's a lot of ins and outs and what have yous.
Strands to keep in my head, man. You know, a lot of strands in old Duder's head.
But the question about the black faces, though, like you had mentioned, I think in your video, there's one theory that they might have been doing a minstrel show to entertain themselves because we know they had theatrical stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But there also is this idea that it just could be that they had extremely advanced scurvy. And I saw one where they said that when he said they had black faces, it actually might have been black mouths, just mistranslated. And that is a thing that happens is the gums turn black and necrotic. And so, as well as the tongue.
It also could have been soot from coal dust. It also could have been balaclavas. You know, like
yeah,
because I don't think balaclavas they weren't named yet because the Crimean War hadn't happened yet, but they could easily have repurposed something to create like something to keep their faces warm. It's just there's a bunch of weird shit in the Franklin expedition that we don't know what happened.
Later, we find that, if people had been listening to these Inuit oral tradition and accounts, it could have been solved a lot quicker. Or at least certain aspects of it. Because I think the location where they said that they found a tent that was filled with corpses and signs of cannibalism would correspond to what is today known as Erebus Bay, which is just coincidentally was named that at the time by people searching for them. They named a bay Erebus Bay and Terror Bay. And spoiler, that's exactly where they find the Erebus in Erebus Bay in 2014. And then in 2016, they found the Terror in the aptly named Terror Bay. So maybe if they had listened to these Inuit who said, oh yeah, we found a bunch of guys in this one bay who had eaten each other, maybe you should search around there.
It was even worse with regard to the Terror because the Inuit had reported that they saw a big mast sticking from the ice on Terror Bay and the British ignored it.
Oh, yeah. And that's actually, so where the ships are eventually found, though, is significantly further south than from where they were last reported in that in the Victory Point message. And so the idea is that they're drifting with the ice, unless there's one theory that maybe one of the ships, at least the Terror, the ice could have broken up and the men who stayed on there were able to actually sail further south.
That
before
is
getting stuck again.
That is my guess. It's what happened. It seems to be a bit too far for them to get to get there unmanned. So that's my theory.
Yeah. So we know that they ultimately, they all died.
They're all dead. Everybody's dead, Dave.
I think the last reported sighting of anybody alive was an Inuit story of encountering 4 men on foot. And as near as they could figure, this would have been like 6 years after the expedition had originally set out. They encountered 4 men who seemed to be emaciated, indicated that they were walking south, and then they overwintered with these men and shared their food with them and nursed them back to health and then sent them merrily on their way. And that was it.
And they gifted them a sword.
That's right. Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, the men gave the Inuit a sword as a sign of gratitude and in repayment for their kindness. That they said was an officer's sword, but as we later found out, I think it is not an officer's sword. It's a marine sword.
Yeah, the Inuit said that the man who was in charge was called Crozar, which gave more oomph to the idea that Crozier was, leading the last men, which is an idea which has stuck with the Franklin ever since. This is an OG Franklin theory, and even the Terror, depicts this. But the sword, it was a Marine sword because they had a group of Marines on board. And based on when it was given out, it was in the reign of William IV. The theory is that it was Solomon Tozer's sword, which would fit with the Inuit accidentally pronouncing it as Crozier. Or possibly someone hearing Crozier because they wanted him to be in charge of the last man.
Yeah. But that is the last... it seems verified because they had the sword account of any living men from the expedition.
I think there's one more after that, but it's a much more spotty. There was guys about halfway down Nunavut, and they report of 2 guys heading south, and the remains of a message cairn which just had pieces of wood in it, so it would have been broken into.
The Inuit who said that they had gone to these ships and been on there, they said they'd found corpses on the boats. They had no use for paper, and so they just kind of scattered any books and stuff to the wind and took metal items. One of the stories was about how they cut their way into a ship from the ice level, and then when the ice thawed, there was a big hole in the ship, and so it took on water and it sank. I think that might have been the Terror.
Yeah.
And so... they don't find the ships until, as I said earlier, 2014. They find the Erebus in Erebus Bay. And that was, again, going off of Inuit oral tradition. They're like, maybe we should actually look where they've been telling us it's been this entire time. And hey, there it was. And then, 2 years later, they find the Terror. And archaeology is still ongoing because first of all, Arctic archaeology is hard enough. Marine Arctic archaeology is even harder.
Yeah.
You have a very narrow window. Divers can only be down for so long at a time. The wrecks aren't terribly deep. I think Erebus is only under 36 feet of water, and it has more damage than the Terror, which is in slightly deeper water, which is probably why it's more well preserved, is because not as much surface activity, waves, and also passing ice to mess it up.
Yeah, it appears that Erebus was crushed by the ice to at least some degree. And one of the groups of sailors who met up with the Inuit, the Inuit said they were trying to mime destruction, or so they thought it was like their ship being destroyed. And so it's theorized those guys came from Erebus.
So the ships have been found. There's so much we do not know. The book that I read, part of it is centered around the relationship that the author has with a member of the Inuit community, a guy named Louis, who lives on King William Island. And he has a family oral tradition of his great-grandfather. They found flat stones somewhere on the north end of the island that had been laid in, and they pried one up, and it seemed that they had been cemented in. There was some in it. That's another story that happens in the Franklin stuff too, is that there's another mention of cement being used, that they did have cement with them. But there's flat stones that are piled up. They pried up one end and found some cement and dug through that, and they found more flat stones. But then it was a hunting expedition that his great-grandfather was on, so they didn't try anymore, and they left. And now his family's been trying to find that location ever since, because he's convinced that it is the tomb of Sir John Franklin. And that's one of the holy grail things that people are looking for, is if they buried those guys on Beachy Island with that much pomp and circumstance, surely the captain is buried in some kind of significant way somewhere. Yes? Unless he was buried at sea. We don't know.
There's those two possibilities. There's a third possibility, which is he might have been kept on the ship in a barrel of alcohol or something that they had to try and take him home, like what happened with Nelson.
Oh, okay. I didn't see that one. That makes sense too. Yeah, they're like, oh yeah, this guy's going to Westminster, baby.
So again, lots of we don't knows going on.
Yeah. But so at first, while researching this, I'm especially after reading about the copper mine expedition, I was like firmly in this idea that like, oh, this is just a series of poor decisions that he was making. And I just thought he was very inept, which is partly true. But modern science has suggested that like, even if he had done everything right, he still would have failed. And it's because due to ice core samples, the 1840s was the worst time to visit the Arctic in 700 years. There were 5 years where the ice did not thaw. And so even if like all these other factors were removed and he did everything right, he still would have got stuck in the ice and been stuck there stranded for at least 5 years. And
the searchers, the excellent, the extra level of cruelness to this, because of the ice kept not thawing, it kept building up and building up and building up. The searchers who came, they saw the ice, they saw the amount of ice, and they were like, yeah, there's no fucking way they went through that way. Yeah, that's impossible. They could not conceive the idea that was an open waterway just 5 years earlier.
Yeah.
So they searched in the wrong places.
They're digging in the wrong place.
And then also that they were not prepared for overland travel either. They didn't have any sleds because the idea was this is going to be purely water-based. That's why they had to drag the boats on makeshift sledges. They didn't have the right shoes or clothing for overland travel either.
Yeah.
Because that was not considered a possibility. They're like, oh, the thaw will come and then we're good to go. And that is not the case. And then you have other factors like scurvy. They did bring a bunch of lemon juice because they had known for a while that lemon juice solves the problem of scurvy. What they didn't know is that vitamin C degrades pretty rapidly, at least in lemon juice.
Yeah.
And so even though they brought thousands of cans sealed with lead solder and now filled with an acidic liquid, I didn't think about that, of lemon juice that they thought was going to help them stave off scurvy. That didn't work. And so, if the ice didn't get them, the scurvy would, or the lead poisoning, or polar bears. One theory that was put forward by Ken McCougan in his book, speaking of polar bears, is that he found in the accounts, the records from the copper mine expedition, there's a point where they eat a polar bear. And Franklin said that the Dene hunters have killed this bear that had attacked the camp. They don't eat it out of a sense of taboo, but they know that us British have no such taboo, so they've brought us the meat. We boiled the pods, and they were very sweet and tender. So he's like, okay, so here's an instance of the indigenous people saying, hey, don't eat polar bear. And him being like, oh, it's some weird, like, I don't know, ignorant thing of theirs. Of course, we're starving. We're going to eat this meat. The reason why they didn't eat polar bear is that polar bears, terrible, they're just riddled with trichinosis. And as well as if you eat the liver, you'll die from vitamin A poisoning because their liver has so much vitamin A in it.
Yeah.
But the theory that was put forward is like, so we have an instance of Franklin eating polar bear after knowing like that the locals don't. In that case, he seems to have gotten lucky that they had cooked the meat enough that he didn't get the trichinosis. But on King William Island, there is a huge population of polar bears. And so he theorized that even though like their muskets, I mean, there's other evidence that suggests their muskets were not well equipped to kill a polar bear, you can't rule out that they might have been ingenious enough to find a way to dispose of some polar bears and eat them. He brings it up as an example of maybe explaining why the discrepancy of enlisted men versus officers dying at that point in the Victory Point letter is that they were eating food that was prepared in different ways. So even if they were all eating polar bear, it would have been cooked to a different standard for the officers than the enlisted men. And so it might have been the enlisted men were getting like undercooked polar bear, and so they're getting trichinosis, because some of the symptoms of trichinosis also mirror symptoms of like lead poisoning and even scurvy. And so that was one of the things. I don't think it explains all of it. I think scurvy most definitely, but we can't rule out that they were also somehow poisoning themselves. Another piece of evidence is that like in the 1600s, there was a Norwegian expedition trying to find the Northwest Passage. They got shipwrecked and stuck in the ice. They ate polar bear, and all but like 3 of them died. And in the captain's accounts, he's talking about the symptoms of his men. They're being killed by a mystery illness. And the symptoms that he explains line up with trichinosis, but at the time he thought it was scurvy. So there's that, either all is to say, there's no way that they weren't doomed from the beginning.
Yep. It's the history of Arctic exploration is a history of guys with hubris getting very cold and having a terrible time.
Yeah, I mean, when we saw that before I knew why the ships were named Erebus and Terror, and thinking that they had chosen those names, it's like, yeah, these are my 2 ships. This is the HMS Hubris, and this is the HMS Arrogance. You want to sail with me?
There was another British exploration ship which did some polar stuff. This is a little bit beforehand. It wasn't quite involved in anything as dramatic, but it was called the Carcass.
Nominative determinism shows up in Least Haunted a lot. And that is another thing that you might get a kick out of this, given your some of the other subject matter of your videos. So John Franklin shares a name with an actor who is the guy that played Isaac in the Children of the Corn movies. So in my head, even though I know what Sir John Franklin looks like, I kept thinking of Isaac from Children of the Corn, talking about he who is behind the icebergs.
It's clearly the Toonback.
Yes, that's the in the book and the show, The Terror. The explanation is that they are being stalked by a
giant fucking demon bear.
Yeah, a demon bear, a piece of indigenous folklore, which, as people who listen to the show know, that I'm not a fan of when Western media uses indigenous culture for their big, bad, scary monster.
There's a very odd bit of convergent evolution with the Terror, which is connected to this. There was a Doctor Who fan audio made years before the Terror was written, called Terror of the Arctic, which is about the Doctor and his companion landing in the Arctic, finding the crews of the Erebus and Terror, and the plot is almost identical to the Terror, and it even includes a giant demon bear killing them, but they call it a Tupilak, and they're both based on the I believe the Inuit monster, the Turngak. And there's just the fact that these 2 things, when I first listened to it, I assumed the Doctor Who one had ripped off the Terror, but not so much. But yeah,
well, I watched a video of yours that completely ruined a script that I was writing, because it turned out that well, we do a little side project for Least Haunted called the Crepuscular Quadrant, which is a holiday special show where for an episode we're basically a Twilight Zone parody. And I was working on a script for a future special, and then I watched your video about Virtual Nightmare, the UPN Matrix ripoff, and I was familiar with Tunnel Under the World. I'd read that short story, which this was based on. But there's like a certain element in this made-for-TV sci-fi movie that came up that was almost like so oddly specific to a plot element that I had worked into this special that I was writing, where now I'm like, well, shit.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Oh, it's not your fault. It's just,
I'm sorry it happened.
Oh, yeah. But sometimes, that's what happens, is that things, you think you're writing something original and it turns out something else had already happened upon it. I don't know, something archetypes bullshit.
Yeah, and with regard to the Terror and Terror in the Arctic, they're both dealing with... I understand from a writer's point of view how they both ended up at the same end point, problematic as it is. Like you've got the crews there. You got to have something killing them that's a bit more dramatic than just them dying of all the illnesses, because that's not the story they wanted to tell. And there's only certain amounts of monsters that they can use, and there are a bunch of other parallels as well. So I can understand creatively why they did it, but yes, it does definitely have its issues. Mining Inuit beliefs for your narrative.
See, and this is like the opposite side of the coin from like the least haunted ethos that I have, is that for me, like the actual human horror story of these poor men being stuck in the ice and all this happening to them and their fate, that is like the scary thing. That is what is, it's like when faced with the what was there was an art movement we've talked about on this show before, and I forget the name now. I did it before. It was an early Victorian art movement of painting naturescapes that were supposed to illustrate the insignificance of man and were like terrorize you basically. And it's this idea of like, nature is so vast and indifferent to you. That's scary enough. You don't need to bring any, like, that is the supremely natural. You don't need to bring in supernatural elements to make it any scarier to me.
It's kind of the cosmic horror.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, this is a cosmic horror story at its heart. This is like Lovecraftian, where the cold and just, it's, or maybe it's more like an Algernon Blackwood, the willows.
And the one thing I realized, I don't think I put it into my videos, but seeing the Inuit, because a lot of Inuit were not contacted by white people. They lived and they died without knowing that white people claimed their land. But imagine being one of those ones who had no contact with white people, who come across the ships or come across the guys from the ships. If it's the ship, they come across it and it's this giant alien dead thing that you have no context for. You go inside and there's corpses and weird shit you don't understand. That is the opening of Alien.
Oh yeah, totally.
So it's a cosmic horror from the point of view of the Inuit as well.
Yeah, that's a, that'd be an interesting take on it to see represented. Like, no, this is just like, imagine being in that context, in that position, and then finding where they've cannibalized each other and is still having no frame of context of what the hell is going on.
Yeah.
No wonder it stayed in the oral tradition. Like, of course you're going to be talking about this. This is like this is the horror story that gets told around the campfire. Like the
Inuits, they come across the white people in this period who are incredibly rich. Because they have all the metal, they have all the wood, they have all these things that the Inuit find priceless, but they have no idea how to survive. They have no idea how to do it. They keep dying and killing and eating each other and stuff like that. So the Inuit eventually came up with the folkloric explanation that also they were doing the work of dogs by man hauling. So they were doing that. So they came up with a folkloric exploration that Caucasians were the children of disobedient girls and dogs.
Oh,
just to explain into the cosmology, or explain the presence in the world, which makes perfect sense.
Which also makes us the second episode of this show in a row where dogmen have come in. We've talked about dogmen. Wow. I'm going to have to start adding dogman to our, we have bingo cards on our Discord that people can get and fill out. So I'm going to start adding dogman to the bingo card.
Sorry. I just remembered there's something that I should have mentioned earlier. There's a book called The Franklin Conspiracy, where it's basically InfoWars for Franklin stuff. And it theorizes that the crews were trying to enter some sort of a magical realm that the Inuit had connection to, and the crews actually died from radiation poisoning.
That's a lot.
It is insane. I have a copy of it. I've been promising for years to do a video about it. It is just a massive project, having to read through it and then work out exactly how wrong it is on every single level in how many ways, because it is quite insane. But
You'll have. I need to know the name of that. Send me the name of that book. I think I will undertake that task with you. I will start reading that book.
The Franklin Conspiracy.
Okay.
I forget the name of the author.
So, Franklin's expedition lives on in pop culture. We were talking before we were actually recording this morning about how it wasn't. I didn't learn about it really in school, and you didn't either. I found it mostly in books that were in National Geographic. You know, they like to every so often let's trot out those frozen bodies and parade them around again. But there's other pop culture references to it. One that I didn't know about until you brought to my attention is that Crozier is a canonical Marvel villain.
Yes, he is. Marvel Comics.
Which is just batshit. He's like some kind of necromancer, undead, immortal being.
Yeah, he wasn't the captain. He was a doctor on the ship, and rather than continue marching south, they decided he took a drug of his own creation to simulate death, and everyone thought he was dead, and he assumed they'd leave him behind so then he could wake up and somehow be fine. But instead, they buried him very deep, so he was dug up, 150 years later, and he looks like John Torrington. The Shaolin body. Corpse. And he's somehow able to, he's got magic as well. If you just look up Crozier Marvel, it is, he went by the name Pestilence.
This was a real human being, everybody. This was a real person who lived and suffered, and now honestly, he's a Marvel monster.
Honestly, that doesn't bother me so much because Crozier, he's got biographies, he's got a big Wikipedia article. You can learn about the real guy. It's very easy. I feel what was done by Dan Simmons in The Terror with his villain Cornelius Hickey is much worse, because all we know is he was Irish. We know he was on the ship from the muster thing. He had a knife that had his name on it that was found among the dead. But he was turned into a hideous, sadistic monster in the novel The Terror. And even the makers of this Terror TV show felt bad about that. They changed it so Hickey was innocent and it was an unnamed asshole who took his identity and joined the ship.
They could have just invented a random new crew member for that role and nobody would have actually called him out on it. You didn't have to be, if you're already going to be inaccurate in the sense that you're going to have a giant demon bear, someone's going to forgive you being inaccurate if not all the named characters match the 129 crew of the expedition.
Well, they could have even come up with an idea that he joined the crew when they last met the whalers just before they entered the Arctic proper.
Oh yeah. So he wouldn't be on the roll list. Yeah. Well, there's also the song Northwest Passage by Canadian singer Stan Rogers, which I have to say it's been stuck in my head. Is as ridiculous as it is. It's like it's an a cappella banger, everybody. Northwest Passage. It also inspired an Iron Maiden song. Specifically, John Torrington's corpse inspired the Iron Maiden song Stranger in a Strange Land, which is not about the Heinlein novel. It's about a frozen corpse from a polar expedition being dug up in the 20th century.
And the Star Trek Beyond, you could make the argument that it's an accidental reference to the Franklin expedition because the ship they find where the people had crashed and these explorers had got lost and they consumed, other beings in a sci-fi version of cannibalism to survive. That ship was called the Franklin.
Ah!
But it was named after, it was originally called the USS Pioneer, but they changed it to Franklin because the director's dad was called Frank Lynn. And so it's a reference to the guy's dad, but it fits in perfectly with the Franklin expedition by accident.
You have to wonder, like, what kind of baggage did he have that he named the ship that carried cannibals after his dad? Let's unpack that.
No idea.
Let's not. Okay, is there anything else that I'm forgetting that we should mention about the Franklin expedition before we wrap up? The spiritualists made a little industry off of supposedly communicating with spirits and giving tips about the Franklin expedition. And some of those tips actually ended up being kind of accurate, but they probably were just, stealing from Richard King.
Yeah, the Coppin family, who are local to my hometown. The Captain William Coppin. He has like dormitories in the local university are named after him. His daughter basically claimed, was doing spiritualist stuff because it was in vogue, and she was asked where the Franklin, people were, and she listed out these names of places, one of them being Point Victory, and she was pretty accurate. Now, because so many people were doing this sort of crap, someone's going to be more accurate than the rest, and it just so happened it was the Coppins.
Yeah. And that those last men who died, they actually kind of succeeded. Because like the last sightings of them would be in the area that actually is the connecting point to the western side of the Northwest Passage.
Yeah, that's why the Crozier Monument in his hometown of Banbridge has it actually written on the plinth of his statue, discoverer of the Northwest Passage, because they take the opinion that he found it, because when he led the Death March south, that was their opinion.
It's a fascinating story. I can't wait to see future developments about what they pull up from the ships, and they might find some log books, because we don't know. There's never been logs found. They could have been some of those books that were scattered to the wind by the Inuits. They could have been left in cairns that were raided. We don't know. But there might be backup books, or who knows what else is down in those ships. It's just a pretty fascinating, interesting story.
Yeah, and there's the there's so many things you could do several more hours on this, just going back and forth with random stuff.
Yeah. But we won't do that. We've taken enough time. So let's see. Did we learn anything? Stay out of the Arctic, I guess.
Yeah, if you're a Victorian, definitely. But if you're a Victorian, you're pretty old by this point, so hopefully you would.
The Northwest Passage is becoming. Well, they're thinking about it might become more viable as an actual shipping route. A few cargo ships have actually successfully passed through it in recent decades because of global warming. However, there's certain parts where the water is still too shallow for certain large ships to get through. The idea that's actually what kind of led to the discovery of the ships, is that it was an excuse to find them was also mapping the Northwest Passage with sonar and getting accurate depth readings for future ships that might go through, and also resource extraction. So here we go again, colonialism 2.0. I think I had a point there.
Point is, white people who go to the Arctic full of hubris tend to die.
Yeah, I guess that's it. Also, that in the future, people will be hanging out in these open waterways that are ice-free year-round. And the idea that, a bunch of people froze to death and ate each other here after being stuck in ice for 5 years would be something that would be hard to believe.
Yeah, and the global warming is definitely messing up the... It's definitely making whatever is in the holds of the Erebus and Terror sort of disintegrate faster. Documents are going to be probably the first to go. So I really hope they manage to find some stuff.
Yeah, it also means that if they were to dig up those 3 graves on Beachy Island again in the future, they would not be quite so fresh. They're also probably not as fresh because they thawed them out with warm water to do the autopsies in the 1980s. I'm sure that didn't help.
And they did something similar to when they autopsied Hartnell to begin with.
Yeah.
Which, if I remember, they had to do that, the original autopsy in the dark, because it was the polar winter when they were there.
Oh, yeah.
So maybe they did the Y upside down by accident. Maybe, he lost track of what end he was at.
That's not his head.
Oh, he's very well hung, isn't he?
This is interesting. He's got hands where his feet should be. Anyone else think that's kind of weird? No one noticed that when he was alive? Oh, all right. Anyway. All right. Well, with that, we'll wrap it up. So, Diamanda, thank you for coming on. If people want to check out your stuff, where can they find you? What's the best way?
YouTube, Diamanda Hagan on YouTube. I've got a bunch of, as you mentioned before, I do a bunch of like random like horror movie stuff, but I also increasingly do history things too. I have a nice playlist of videos on historical polar explorations that went terrible. And recently I've been doing sort of more general non-polar history. So there's a lot of videos there if you want to check some out.
Cool. All right. Well, I want to also take a moment to, I forgot to do it at the top, wish everybody a very happy Pride. This will be the last episode coming out during Pride Month.
Yeah.
And shout out all the other stuff. I'll put a plug in here. Hey, everybody, jumping in real quick here before we wrap up to shout out our Monster Squadron patron producers, our Squatties, who help make this whole thing possible with their support. You know who you are, but just so everybody else knows as well, I'm going to shout you out by name. Thank you, A Cow's Upper Shoulder Roast, a.k.a. Chuck, Travis Alexander, The Bi Barbarian, Rachel Krieger, Tom Dahl, Justin Duckham, Mary Ellen, Kelly Flynn, Gunnar Franks, Carla Harrington, Havelock, Kelsey Hopkins, Christina Hurley, Ian, Ken with 2 N's or Monaken with 3, TJ Levenhagen, Alicia Overton, Jordan Ramey, a different one, but the same one, Blue Roan, Seti Fan, Sabrina S., and Tatum. Thank you guys. And if you want to support us too, go to patreon.com/leasthaunted. You can join up in a few different ways. And with that out of the way, I'm going to get back into the episode. Thanks again to Diamanda Hagan for joining us. Go check out her YouTube and everything that she has available for you. And with that, we're going to sign off. Let's jump back in. Okay, so thanks for joining us. And until next time, remember, the only thing that's haunted
is you.
Laughing at you.
Say goodbye.
For just one time, I would take the Northwest Passage to find the hand of Franklin reaching for the Beaufort Sea, tracing one warm line through a land so wild and savage, and make a Northwest Passage to the sea. Westward from the Davis Strait is there 'twas said to lie, a sea route to the Orient for which so many died, seeking gold and glory, leaving weathered broken bones, and a long forgotten lonely cairn of stones. For just one time, I would take the Northwest Passage to find the hand of Franklin reaching for the Beaufort Sea. Tracing one warm line through a land so wild and savage, and make a northwest passage to the sea. The Least Haunted podcast is recorded before a dead studio audience and is a presentation of Sequoidea Productions, LLC.